Suffice it to say that states can pursue their own independent sovereign interest. And while they pursue their own independent sovereign interest, those of us who are committed to regionalism, committed to the expansion of regional integration, do not have the luxury of waiting. As I heard the references to the Caribbean Court of Justice earlier today, I wondered if we had waited, what would have happened? I think the evidence tells us that that court has gone on to be a fine arbiter of Caribbean legal questions, that it has vindicated the rights of many a Caribbean citizen. And in its operations, Mr. President, has become one of the finest examples of regional cooperation and integration, albeit not fully subscribed. I say that to make the point, Mr. President, that I hope that we do not miss in this moment the clarion call to continue to make bold moves and to continue to do big things that have extraordinary impact, extraordinary positive impact on the people of this region. There is a sentiment that concerns me as a young person in this Caribbean region, and particularly in this Barbados. And it is, while I am a young person, I'm no longer the youngest member of this chamber, a distinction I happily see to the chamber's newest member, but young nonetheless. And a sentiment, Mr. President, about how fast we go and how quickly we change. And sir, there seems to be a notion that we are not to go too far and we are not to go too fast, and that the government of Barbados ought to move through governance jittery and breathless and looking over its shoulder. I do not think we have that luxury. The moment defined by the geopolitical challenges that I talked about earlier require us to be sure-footed, to be steady, but to do something. And it is fine to take a breath and to analyze. But I think the Caribbean integration movement, perhaps we have taken too many breaths and we have analyzed to death everything from Sir Tridaf Rampal's report at blanking on the name now, Time for Action, to the assessment of Jamaica in 2017, we report after report after report. And we have to move. If we are committed to the notions of regionalism, to the core values of regionalism, aimed at bringing this Caribbean region closer together through trade, through investment, through movement, we must move. The Honorable Senator Worrell said a number of things in his presentation this morning. He said that we can't only move when it is convenient, we can't only pursue the aims of regionalism. Governments can't only pursue the aims of regionalism when it is convenient. Mr. President, this is a moment where the government of Barbados is being courageous. It is a moment where the government of Barbados is evidencing a degree of consciousness and conscience, but this is not, Mr. President, about convenience. And let me take the opportunity to say that in other quarters, there have been a great number of comments and sentiments that have concerned me on this notion of regionalism and on this notion of a closer Caribbean with deeper ties, sir. And while it is fine to say that, as the Honorable Senator Kevin Boyce indicated, that persons will have some degree of angst and a reaction to the things that concern them, let us be clear that those of us who sit in this chamber and that political parties in the main are not to, well, are not to inspire that angst, Mr. President. They're not to drum up the xenophobia and the insularity. That where there are legitimate concerns, they should be raised and addressed, but certainly in my view, there appears to be a convenience to the narratives that you hear sometimes, a convenience, Mr. President, for political institutions whose track records in recent years on these issues have been clear, some of which you heard today, the ever how welcome wait for a call comments, the indication on the eve of the 2018 election that if a particular political party won the election, we would extricate ourselves from the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice. So I don't think that we get to come here and to engage in a historical analysis and to wring our hands about regional travel and that kind of thing, which is a legitimate issue. But let us be clear about the track record. Let us be clear about the things that we have said and done that are impediments to the regional integration movement. Mr. President, Mr. President, the bill before the House is bold, it is new, it inspires a degree of integration that never long contemplated but never realized in this region. But, Mr. President, the idea that we are going to fling the doors open in Barbados or in St. Vincent and the Grenadines or in Dominica or in Belize, Mr. President, and that this is not properly managed migration, sir, is a misnomer.
Mr. President, on a point of order.
Yes, what's the point of order?
I believe that the Honorable Senator may be misrepresenting what I said with regard to the points about the CCJ. In my presentation this morning, my points about the CCJ was not to say that it was opposed. I said that it was supported by the opposition, by both parties, and that there was no political divide here in Barbados. So I would not want to be misrepresented to think that I was saying that there was a political divide here in Barbados when we adopted the CCJ. That was not my point, Mr. President.
So noted. Please press on, Senator Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. A point of elucidation, if I may. I was never indicating that the Honorable Senator had indicated that there was a political divide on the question of the CCJ in its embryonic stages. I never said that. What I did say, though, is that on the eve of the 2018 election, a prime minister of your party indicated that if they were successful in that election to come, just days away, that they would extricate themselves from the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice. That is what I said. So, Mr. President, this is a moment for the Caribbean region to come together. This is a moment, the fulfillment of a dream of successive leaders of this Caribbean region. This is a moment for a generation of Barbadians, Mr. President, to fulfill that which our forefathers never got to. There will be, it is my hope that other countries will join the effort. It certainly is my hope that there will be an opportunity to amend that schedule to the benefit of a greater number of citizens of states from across the CARICOM region, Mr. President. But let us not, in all of the concern, much of it, or a great deal of it, in my view, drummed up by particular individuals. Let us not miss the importance of this moment. Let us not miss the idea that, or the reality, I should say, that this Caribbean has the capacity to do big things, to do bold things, and to make a difference in the lives of this Caribbean civilization. Mr. President, to quote a former leader of the Democratic Labour Party, former Prime Minister of Barbados, my apologies, it is dehumanizing and false to view the Caribbean as potential problems. The Caribbean is, after all, a civilization, and long may we remember that. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Andrew Boyce. Senator Dr. Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to start by saying I've thoroughly enjoyed the debate on this bill so far. A bit of cut and thrust, which is necessary sometimes, that is fine. But I really am pleased to hear the type of sentiments as it relates to where we have come from in terms of our position as a country as it relates to regionalism. And I think a lot of the sentiments sometimes from younger individuals is because they simply don't know their history. They do not understand the complexity and the trials and the triumphs that have happened in the Caribbean and how that has resulted in the benefits that they currently enjoy today. So, Mr. President, the leader of government business noted that she is not once, but twice, a graduate of the University of the West Indies. Mr. President, I'm not once, not twice, but 3 times. So So by my mere education, I would have to be a regionalist. And Mr. President, I had the great experience recently to extend the hospitality to an individual who is not from a member state of CARICOM, but who resides and they are a citizen of Martinique. We, as the leader of government business, were in a foreign country over in OA, and from the time we heard each other, we knew where our geographical home was. And it is those types of interactions that remind us of our commonality and the shared struggles that have to then forge the policy platform by which we understand how we interact with each other and how we move forward as what was just described as this great Caribbean civilization. Mr. President, I want to start by saying this bill, as it regards to free movement, also amplifies the notion and the clear fact that it is an extremely difficult task to, one, govern and manage these small island economies that are open to the rest of the world. That is clearly a fact. There are no easy choices. The contemplation that has to go in with the complexity of the problems that we face cannot be an easy endeavor. And some would argue that a central part of our survival is regionalism. We are too small, and we cannot be insular in our national interest to forget that when we go out on the world stage, we do so better together. Things like our small markets, diseconomies of scale. We've heard already the notion of small populations and now declining populations. All are realities that our leaders have to contend with and provide a solution, Mr. President. But, sir, as we navigate the 21st century, and in loving our neighbors, and also in loving ourselves and inviting them to reside here, and I like the term that was used by the leader of government business, pay to play, there are some critical matters that once we invite others into our home, we have to make sure that the home is on solid foundation. Mr. President, this debate has placed regionalism and national development somewhat at odds. And that may be because we feel as though there are things in Barbados that are not going the right way, and they need to be addressed in order for us to have the comfort level in the public domain and in public discourse as it relates to the free movement of persons. Sir, when I say having our house in order, you have to look at it from an economic position, a social position, an environmental position, and even from a national consciousness position. Mr. President, I want to start with the economy. Sir, in the last 24 years, the Barbados economy has only grown on average by 1% each year. In the last 24 years. 2000 to 2007, we had about 2 to 3% growth. We know what the global recession did in 2008. In 2015, we had a bit of a recovery. And we all know what COVID-19 has done and the recovery that has happened since then. But for all the peaks and troughs, the long-term average has only been 1%. And we have not truly, really diversified from that one sector that provides the majority of our foreign exchange, which is tourism. On top of that, stagnant wages have also been a characteristic since 2000, Mr. President. Overall, nominal wages in Barbados have increased by 35 to 40%, nominal wages, Mr. President. But because of inflation at a rate of 3.5% on average annually per year, cumulatively, that's about 84%. So what we have is a purchasing power problem in Barbados. So when people have legitimate fears or concerns, this is within the context that these issues are arising as it relates to people coming to Barbados for work, jobs, etc. And I go further, Mr. President, the high cost of living. As it relates to the Caribbean, Barbados is ranked the third most expensive island, only behind the U.S. Virgin Islands and the Bahamas. Then, Mr. President, when we look at these issues, we also have to look at the size of our government as it relates to revenue and expenditure. Mr. President, we are inviting persons to come and contribute to the tax base. But, sir, in the past decade, nominal revenues rose from 2.6 billion to 3.4 billion. That's a 30% increase. Similar trends as it relates to expenditures. So for the last decade, we've had a government as it relates to its tax structure and regime that has grown year on year as well. Mr. President, and the expenditure that comes from government, a lot of that expenditure is in employing people. The Barbados government approximately employs about 21% of the total employed persons in Barbados. And when you make the comparative assessment, it is one of the highest in the region. So you have a large tax base, you have a government that employs a lot of people, 1 in 5 persons. Jamaica employs about 13% of their labor force, Trinidad 15%. But when you get into the range of where Barbados employs, the government of Barbados employs persons, we are comparable with places like the Nordic countries without the benefit of the type of fiscal space that they have. Sir, we have to have context. There are very few Barbadians, I believe, that have an issue with regional integration. As was said earlier, when you go to the heart of the matter, it has always been the free movement of people colliding with the national circumstance of citizens in the country. And Mr. President, I am of the view we can love our country and we can love our neighbors. And in order to do that and inviting persons to come to Barbados, we have to get our house in order. Sir, I am painstakingly going through this because the idea that because you increase the amount of persons coming to Barbados, for instance, to add to the labor force, to add investment into the country and to grow the pie, will likely translate to better outcomes. But that may not be the case. Because you throw money, and this is me being very crass in this argument now, you throw money at a problem, but that does not mean you solve the problem, you just throw money at it. Because, sir, what is being translated here is, as you try to widen the tax net, capture more NIS, that does not mean it translates to better service quality. And I am sure that persons coming from those other countries who've signed on to this free movement also want good service. Because they are also now going to what? Pay to play. So the same legitimate concerns that Barbadians have, I am sure when those persons come to Barbados and take up the opportunity here, they will also want social services that work for them and their families. Mr. President, and I believe that that is where the frustration lies, because we have a situation where you have a high tax burden, a high cost of living, but persons, particularly in our middle class, who do not reap the benefits from the taxation that they pay. Mr. President, when we talk about our social services, that we are now inviting persons from across the Caribbean and from these three countries, sorry. They expect, when they bring their children here, to have adequate environments for schooling, for their kids. That is an expectation. Mr. President, they expect that they will have the quality of education that is commensurate with the taxes that they will be asked to pay. Mr. President, when you live in a country where the last known official literacy rate was in 2014, was about 99.6% in Barbados, but we don't know what the figure is today, it begs the question, is that standard being maintained in the Barbados education system? Because these types of fundamental things, we don't even know. I mean, I could be speaking out of turn here. But when was the last time we had an official data on our literacy rate? And is that a reflection of pockets of deficiency in the school system? Or is that systematic? And do we need to do something about it? I know the government has made various pronouncements and they've put measures in place for educational reform, Mr. President, because we now have to equip children to not just compete in a Barbadian or even a regional context, but a global marketplace, and to prepare them for a workplace that currently does not exist because of how technology is quickly and rapidly evolving. Do we have the capacity to do that? Do we have the creativity to do that? And those are the legitimate questions that we have to ask ourselves, not just for contention, but, sir, to find solutions. That is the reality. I was very pleased to hear, Mr. President, another area that I had the unfortunate experience of having to interact with is the QEH. Not myself, but a family member. And the QEH is one of those primary institutions and cornerstones of our society that cannot be allowed to fail. It simply cannot. And when we say that we may or may not want able-bodied persons coming, productive persons, we don't know who is coming. And therefore, we will have to cater to them. But in addition to expanding the hospital, which I am completely in agreement with, but it comes at a cost. Let us be clear again. We have to have a better understanding of things in terms of the quality of service, such as improvement in patient safety, for instance. What's happening in our hospital as it relates to readmission rates for persons who visited, patient satisfaction. Because if we've learned anything, because we've built a new facility, that does not, again, automatically translate to improved quality of service. Mr. President, and it is not all doom and gloom, because there's an attractiveness to Barbados as it relates to health. Although we might be third in the Caribbean as it relates to cost of living, we're also the third highest ranking island as it relates to centenarians per capita. So we live long. We live long around here, Mr. President. So that is an attractive indicator to anybody who wants to come to Barbados. But I am fully committed to understanding, Mr. President, that there are things and cracks in our system that, if left unattended to, could break our society. Mr. President, I want to also, as I earlier stated, there are issues of economic importance, social importance, but also environmental. Because when we talk about changes to the population, increasing economic activity, these also have implications for your energy use and your environmental footprint. Mr. President, things like water resources, as was mentioned earlier, although it is not, Mr. President, island-wide, we do clearly have an issue as it relates to the quality of service to residents in St. Lucie. That is just a fact. The government has instituted a program to the tune of about $2.6 billion, I believe it is, for mains replacement. So to improve, yes, the quality of the service, you also have to, yes, still spend money. But it is then the expectation that there is an improvement in that service, Mr. President. Sir, issues such as waste management, our landfill issues, perennial garbage collection, all of those things speak to our ability and the capacity to house a certain number of individuals and a level of business here in Barbados. And if it appears at the moment for those services to be overstretched, people who are overworked, and it seems as though we are at capacity and breaching that capacity, then the only logical thing for someone sitting down at home who heard that on October 1st, there's a free movement of persons, that is a natural reaction. But it is not to say that we cannot do one and also identify those core areas that when we do open our borders to those in this managed migration, that we fix these issues. Because, Mr. President, I believe Barbados has the intellect, it has the creativity to get our systems right. But somehow, Mr. President, we are faced with an environment that it is always the other person's fault. But more importantly than that, what I am genuinely concerned about now is as we move forward and we support and we be the first movers in this regional integration and the free movement of persons, is that we are at a crossroads where we are experiencing very weak institutions, or institutions appear to be weakening. They are not fulfilling their mandates, and there's a level a high level of dissatisfaction across Barbados as it relates to our social services. Mr. President, the idea that we have a large problem as it relates to inefficiencies, even when resources are placed within some of our institutions, there seems to be a level of wastage and poor outcomes. And that is then all combining to the issue of falling standards. And this was said in the other place by someone who sits on the government side. So we are all here living, experiencing it. Mr. President, I believe that as we move forward, and my position is that we do need to have regional integration. I support it, Mr. President. But that has to be done concomitantly with a complete overhaul of some of the systems that we have that currently service the Barbadian public, if we want to reside and live in a country that functions in a 21st century context. And what I am challenged with, Mr. President, is I do not hear from those who are on a political divide, whether that be mainstream or fringe, a core proponent or solution towards possibly smaller government, focusing on core social issues and leaving all of the other frills to possibly private sector, public-private partnerships or the private sector. Mr. President, a reduced tax regime concomitant with that reduced government, and allow for a level of innovation and creativity to flourish. And this is just an alternative I'm putting out. I'm not saying this is the solution. But what I am saying is a lot of the things that we are currently doing are not working in our favor for us to compete and to continue to be the first mover in a globalized world that is becoming more insular. If we do not take care of home and reach out to our Caribbean neighbors, we will find ourselves in a very desperate situation where we go begging and become recolonized in some form or fashion, whether that be economically, militarily. Mr. President, the list goes on. These are real challenges that we are about to face, Mr. President. But, sir, I want to, at this time, place what I've said in the context of an excerpt from the book, The Essentials of Owing. And this was former Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, late Professor, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, who, at the opening ceremony of the 20th Heads of Government meeting of CARICOM stated, and I quote, I hope you'd allow me to read this, Mr. President. The building of a single Caribbean economy is integrally part of a greater requirement to create a single Caribbean society. And on the eve of a new century, because he said this in 1999, we must resolve to strain on every sinew to make it succeed. He then went on, Mr. President, to quote Sir Arthur Lewis, who said this in 1972. Sir Arthur Lewis spoke in these terms to the Caribbean community in his capacity as the president of the Caribbean Development Bank. Nothing here is politically easy, but to say that solutions are politically impossible is either to doubt the West Indian genius for self-government or more likely to assert that some other interests must have higher priority. Sound discipline is not genetically determined. It derives from history, but history changes every day, being altered by learning and adaptation. What is true is that we cannot adopt bold policies until they are widely understood. And they cannot be widely understood unless they are frequently discussed in public. That is what we are dealing with today in this debate, Mr. President, in all of its facets. Sir, and I want to end here and quote the former Prime Minister by saying, "We, however, do not have a moment to lose. And it is my hope that 25 years hence, another generation of Caribbean leadership will not be able to proclaim that we lost the moment here in Port of Spain." When regionalism and nationalism collide, Mr. President. Bold ideas that require ingenuity, creativity, but have to sit and reside in the national context in which citizens live. That is what we are dealing with this afternoon, Mr. President. And because of, and I want to wrap up here, Mr. President, because as we be the first movers and the bold policymakers that we are, there is a real and present imminent danger brewing in our waters. And it could single-handedly change the trajectory of our future. It is that simple. Sir, the circumstances that befall us due to the heightened military presence in our southern Caribbean Sea prompt me in this debate to speak the words of the late Maurice Bishop, former Prime Minister of Grenada, who was one of the stronger proponents of the idea of a Caribbean zone of peace. And in 1981, when he delivered in Grenada to CARICOM, the Standing Committee of Ministers of Foreign Affairs, he enunciated and elaborated on what that Caribbean zone of peace means. And I quote, "Some of the substantive requirements to be satisfied in order to have our Caribbean effectively become a zone of peace include the following. 1, prohibition of nuclear weapons in the region. 2, an end to all aggressive military maneuvers in the region. 3, the dismantling of all foreign military bases in the region. 4, the decolonization of all of our territories and the establishment of machinery to end all forms of aggression, including assassinations, mercenary invasions, propaganda interventions, and diplomatic and economic pressures." Mr. President, this is a challenging time for our Caribbean leaders, and it is my hope that we truly put partisan politics aside to deal with matters that will affect us all. Because, Mr. President, we are living in an era that diplomacy no longer seems to be the first order of the day. And it is clear that there will be no easy choices or options. And Mr. President, I would hope that Barbados continues to be at the forefront of the fight for that great Caribbean civilization that we know is possible. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Drake. Senator Trim.
Mr. President, colleagues, I rise to make my contribution to this chamber. Senator Boyce mentioned that he is living the CARICOM dream. I have no doubt, yes, I have no doubt that I am doing the same. I came to Barbados from Ghana when I was 2 years old. My father and my mother preceded me. My sister, she's 10 years older than I am. And my brother, interestingly enough, though 5 years younger than I am, was also born in Guyana. And I have never hidden the fact that I am Guyanese by birth, but as you can hear from my accent, I am possibly as Bajan as they come. And so this bill to me is personal because I have lived and experienced what CARICOM means. To be able to stand here to me is a testament of CARICOM and what regional integration looks like. However, I want to note that the seeds that I believe that our forefathers intended when they envisioned the Federation, when they signed the Treaty of Chaguaramas, we haven't fully reaped those. We have not fully manifested that reality. And while I, like many others, attended the University of the West Indies, and I have friends across the region, having chaired the Caribbean Regional Youth Council and being involved in youth work, I've traveled across the region and I've had the ability to embrace Caribbean culture. And one thing that has stood out to me is that the only difference in many instances between myself and my friends across the region is really what the port that we got off at, or offloaded at the enslaved, or those who were to become enslaved. And so we act, and I said bus stop, because we really aren't that far apart. We really aren't that different. A lot of the words that we use here as part of our dialect, they're used elsewhere. A lot of the foods that we eat are called by another name in another territory. And so we act as though there is this vast divide, this vast difference, when the reality is that it does not exist. But for many young people and for many Caribbean citizens, CARICOM is something that happens at the heads of government meeting. It is something that we see a communique about, a joint statement. It is something that we hear about as a news soundbite. But in many instances, we are unable to figure out, ignoring that many of us went to the University of the West Indies, ignoring all the other ways that we are integrated, that the products that we use often come from right across the sea, right across the Caribbean. We cannot place it in our lives, and so oftentimes it remains outside our scope or outside of our thought process in our day-to-day life. Mr. President, I've heard a lot about CARICOM and regional integration and the Caribbean free movement today, and indeed that is what we are here to discuss. But I want to talk about my reality in CARICOM and therefore what CARICOM means to me. Like I said, I came here when I was 2 years old. Many persons do not know that the first encounter that I had here, I do not remember this, but my sister and I were deported because we came to meet our parents here. She was about 12, I was 2, and we were deported, and my mother had no idea where we were. My aunt put me on a plane, and Barbados put me right back, and we went home. So my mother was frantic at the airport because she had no idea where her children were, having never been called, and my aunt was frantic because my mother is calling to figure out where her 2 girl children are. But let me skip forward to things that I do remember, because I was 10 years old in 2008, and I remember when they said it was time for a change. And I remember going to political rallies, and I remember how xenophobia rose in Barbados to a deafening noise in my ears. I remember the conversation on the street, similar to some of the things that we heard in here today, that Guyanese were here to take our jobs, that the Guyanese women were taking the men. Yeah. Moreover, you had a song called GT Advice. And so it fed xenophobia, it fed tension, it fed fear as entertainment. And so when we speak about freedom of movement and regional integration, for some it is theory. For those who have had the privilege to live where they were born, to be among family and friends that they have known all their lives with no disruption, I do not have that. I have never had it. And so when I was younger and these things occurred, I longed to go home. Matter of fact, I acted up so much my father threatened to send me back to Guyana. And my mother said, absolutely not. But instead, I went to school, and a young man from school called the immigration on me because he disagreed with what I said, and he was going to get $75 for me, because that was the bounty on the heads of those who persons considered or figured to be illegal. It was those things. I remember my father coming home from Fairchild Street and telling us how people scattered like criminals, people who had come from work and were lining, because the immigration parked vans and they rounded them up and collected them. I remember my cousin being deported, and we got a call that said, don't worry about nothing else, just bring her things. Either y'all pay for her to go or we will send her home, and she was one of the lucky ones. I remember. It is not a distant memory. I remember neighbors and relatives whispering about deportations, people nervous because if they heard a knock on their door at 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe a neighbor that you had upset was there, had called the immigration to collect you so that they could get this bounty. It was not whispered that the only good Guyanese was a dead one. It was on the street. It was in school. It was in the institutions that we existed in. It was in the Guyanese bench that when I left Barbados to represent Barbados and to go across the region, to represent, I came back nervous that I would sit on that bench and that I would be sent back home. And I say home not because Guyana is where I only find solace in, because Barbados is very much home to me, but because that is what was considered. And let me be clear, in 2008, the Democratic Labour Party, the opposition, was in office. And that fear existed until they left the office. And even after that, having spent so many years here and under this administration, I was nervous to go to the immigration to apply for my citizenship because of the treatment that I received. If that is not trauma, I don't know what is. And there are still persons who refuse to regularize themselves beyond the current status because they are nervous about what is going to happen. I was not illegal. I've been on student visas. My brother has been on student visas. My mother has had work permits, so has my father. We have been here for a long time. We pay taxes and contribute like anybody else. But that was the treatment that was meted out to us. And as a child, I knew that was wrong because I felt nervous when my mother did not want to speak, because people would say, well, where are you from? How long have you been here? Just testing the waters. We talk about workers working in precarious conditions. At that point in time, employers threatened to deport you or call the immigration, whether you had status or not, because they felt like it was okay. And so today I call it what it was, state-sanctioned xenophobia. And so I listen in here today and I hear words that are very reminiscent of that. The language that we use, these people, foreigners, they are your brothers and sisters. We are your brothers and sisters. We are not strangers. We talk about sowing seeds of doubt in the younger generation. That was said by the Honorable Opposition Senator. That is what doubt looks like. Because for a very long time, CARICOM did not work for me. I was free to live here to some extent, but I was not free to live because I lived in a lot of fear. And I speak not only for me, I speak for others. For those who missed it, ever so welcome wait for a call was said in Guyana about Guyanese nationals coming to Barbados. It was blunt, it was symbolic. It was not about employment, it was about identity. And upon reflection, it is about how we shut our borders and our doors to people who come from this Caribbean space, We talk about successive governments embracing the CARICOM community. There was no community in that. And so rhetoric replaced compassion during that time, and national pride was a tool of division. Many persons here have talked about nationalism. Nationalism is being weaponized for political expediency across the world. The idea that somehow we have always had scarce resources. We have always had unlimited wants. We have always had to decide who gets what, when, and how. That is the basis of politics. That is the basis of our existence. This is not new. Mr. President, we cannot change the past. Try as we may, and we see it happening across the world, there are attempts to rewrite history. We can atone, but we cannot amend. It is what it is. And therefore, we should ask ourselves what is next and what ought to be. What we can do is that we can learn from that time. We can learn how to create a more fair world. We can learn how to be honest about those mistakes. But for any member of the former administration to deny the treatment of CARICOM nationals under that administration is profound dishonesty. And it would be to engage in historical amnesia. There was a song this year called We Forget, I think it is. Well, I want to say that many of us remember. The leader of government business spoke about how we are seen, and I say we, because like I said, y'all heard the accent. People do not care where I was born. I've lived here all my life, and therefore I am Barbadian. And so when we leave here and we go across the region, they remember what we say. They remember our treatment. They remember that period. There was mention of not tarnishing our regional integration efforts. Between 2008 and 2018, guess what? It was tarnished. This is the reparative work. We are repairing our reputation as leaders within the CARICOM community. I heard a member on a popular radio show from the opposition, a representative, note that they should bring statistics. And we know, those of us who conduct research, or those of us who have just had lived experiences, that statistics do not always paint a full picture. That statistics may often ignore the feelings that you get because of policies. Statistics, we cannot quantify trauma. And so numbers cannot substitute the impact that period has on the region. And so because these stories are real, because these scars are real, we need real action that comes down to the root of what CARICOM is supposed to be and what the Caribbean community stands for. Mr. President, I believe deeply that words matter, and that for policymakers, language is important. Words become policy, and policy becomes reality. When we speak fear, when we sow seeds of doubt in the younger generation, when we speak in a manner that suggests that we are spewing condescension wrapped as concern, people learn fear. When leaders speak unity, countries are built. We as policymakers carry the sacred responsibility of shaping the tones of our nations. We cannot preach regional integration at summits and boast about our support of regional integration while practicing exclusion or promoting exclusion. I have been listening to the public discussion in the recent weeks, and I find it so interesting. In my mind, it must be some sort of cognitive dissonance. What I have heard today that ignores that for the last couple of weeks, we have had a political party, undermining the idea, not simply because of legitimate concerns, and I'll speak to that a little later, but simply because for political expediency and what sounds good, playing into fears that have existed in Barbados and that we know exist for many reasons. And so we cannot wave the CARICOM flag at ceremonies and then turn our backs on CARICOM citizens in practice. We cannot do this. This government has refused since it's been elected to do so. And perhaps the best example of that was COVID. In a time where people were picking and choosing who to take care of, we took care of all to the best of our ability. Because in times of plenty, you do not show your character. It is in times of need. It is easy to give when you have the world to give. It is much more difficult when you have to give in rations. And so leadership must be consistent, not just in policy, but also in tone, in empathy, and in truth. And I am not naive, and I've listened today to believe that there are not legitimate concerns that are surfacing. We have legitimate concerns. People have legitimate concerns. To dismiss them would be once again to engage in dishonesty, and I've never believed myself to be a dishonest person, and I do not wish to pass that on to any of my colleagues. And so they ask questions, I said before, what about jobs? What about housing? What about health care? And these are fair questions. As said before, they deserve discussion. They deserve consultation. They deserve conversation. And I believe in many ways that we have sought as an administration to do that. Could we do more? Could we do better? That is always a possibility. To say otherwise would to be complacent. And I do not believe that this administration is complacent. And so the reality is, however, that we do not govern tabula rasa, and I want to start there. We do not start governance with an empty slate. And so we have to be aware that when we talk about things like buses and transportation, we have to be aware that none were bought between 2008 and 2018, when buses devalue in 10 years. So now you are building a new fleet. When we talk about healthcare, if you have not invested in your healthcare system for 10 years, you have to once again invest. When we talk about social care and social networks, if you have not done that, if you have not strengthened them, if you have not supported them, ultimately, you have to now do it once again. And so we are seeing that work, and that is not to say that we have gotten where we aspire to go, but it is to say that we are on our way, and we cannot stop. But we also, at the same time, cannot stop doing the work in the now, which means that the legislation and this bill, freedom of movement, is not the cause of those challenges, and it will not be their cure. It is to say that these challenges should not be used as an excuse to delay our regional obligations. We are signatories. We have not been forced. And so therefore, if we are signatories, we have a responsibility, an obligation to operationalize what we are signatories to. Freedom of movement has always been a commitment under CARICOM. This is not something that has shocked us. Maybe the shock is that we're actually doing it because we have waited so long. But we was talking about this for how long? Exactly. But the shock is not that it is happening. The shock is that, well, the shock is not that it is there. The shock is that it's actually happening. And so in my mind, to me, to my generation that has been hearing about CARICOM for ages, I think the government should be commended for making sure it actually happens. If we waited for perfection, many things would never happen. CARICOM would never have been born. We would have never attempted the federation. Independence would still be a dream. We would still not be a republic and be swearing an oath to the Queen. King now. If this is not an act, a purposeful act of decolonization, I do not know what is. We understand that the provision of jobs, housing, and adequate social services have to be a priority, and we have committed, regardless of what some corners may tell you, to doing that, both in word and in policy, to addressing them head on. But these kind of developments require action whether or not we open our borders, whether or not there is freedom of movement. It has to happen. And so it is our responsibility as policymakers to fix what has to be fixed and not to once again scapegoat or delay regional integration and freedom of movement, because once again I wish to remind you that we have freely signed this. And let us be practical, Mr. President, because this bill is not opening the floodgates, as said by Senator Boyce and Willie Boyce as well. It provides a structured, lawful process. You register with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. You contribute to the NIS scheme. You are part of the formal economy. You are paying taxes and strengthening systems that some fear they will burden. They will be workers. There is no assumption that persons who are coming are going to be welfare recipients, that they are automatically coming begging, bowl, please may I have some more, let me and Oliver Twist. That is not what is happening. They are contributing, they are not competing. And so because their entry and status will be transparent and documented, this framework actually reduces what has the concern been about labor. Employers get away with things because we don't know. We could do our best, but we don't have eyes everywhere. Nobody ain't got eyes in the back of the head. If people do not report that they are being paid less than the minimum wage, or not up to industry standards, or in subpar conditions, then that is something that challenges the government to enforce. We have the Employment Rights Act, the Safety at Work Act, Shops Act. Our legislation is some of the best across the region. And we have an opposition that has many instances opposed every set of labor legislation that this government has brought. Matter of fact, a few weeks ago with the Minimum Wage Act, the raising minimum wage, it was going to cause this hullabaloo of chaos. The sky was going to fall, and people were just going, and businesses were going to close down. And so if you are going to continuously oppose the protection of workers or the improvement, it is difficult then to stand and say at the same time that people are going to be taken advantage of. If you support the increase in minimum wage, why are there conditionalities? We know that minimum wage had to be increased. Ironically, they also oppose the Hotel Concessions Act. And so those are the kind of things that we are seeing that do not align. They are not consistent. It wobbly. In one instance, you want to see progress, you want protection, you want development. In the other instance, you support it, but. And the buts oftentimes are really politically expedient points that oftentimes should not detract from the work that is being done. And so, let us talk honestly, that is the important word, about the need for better housing and some regulations. Let us talk honestly about the need for more efficient health care. Let us talk honestly about stronger social support. But let us also be clear that those are national responsibilities that the government has with or without this bill. And so those cannot be the scapegoats. I agree that there has to be more public education. I agree that we have to engage Barbadians because we have a lot of colonial mindsets about other Caribbean countries. But this is not the time for fear. This is the time for leadership. Leadership that understands that progress rarely comes in comfort, and that understands as well that our development cannot be built on exclusion, and we cannot grow by closing our doors. And I know that some would prefer us to stay at home and govern, because every time we talk in here, they talk about the Prime Minister's travel, as if she is not advocating on our behalf in a world where the haves and the have-nots are becoming increasingly disparate. And so this government is committed to doing both. Senator Drake talked about the fact that sometimes it seems as though regional integration is at loggerheads with national development. And it seems like that, yes, because we have challenges, and because once again, because there is fear, but it is a challenge to upgrade our systems. It is a challenge for us to do better, to expand our infrastructure, to modernize our policies, and to govern with fairness and foresight. It is not one that we should shirk from. And it also reminds us that we are not alone in this task, that our neighbor's success is tied to our own. And so if we truly believe in what is said in the Treaty of Chaguaramas, then we must live that belief through law and action, and not simply at conferences. It has to matter to the average person. And so I want to say that this is what maturity in governance looks like. We have to be willing, as we lead, to face complexity and not to retreat, and to welcome partnership without fear. And Mr. President, I'm very passionate about this because like I said, I've lived this. And so I've had hopes that one day we would be able to get to the same point, or close to that, of our OECS brothers and sisters. We in the Caribbean cannot wall ourselves off. It has been mentioned before that the world is changing, and so we have to change with the world. Independence does not mean standing alone. It means standing tall, and for Caribbean, small island developing states, it has to mean standing together. Bob Marley said, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery." I'm a Marshallian. And for those of you who knows what being a Marshallian means, that is our theme song. That is our anthem. And he said, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, none but yourselves can free our minds." And when he said that, it meant that we had to change the way that we think about ourselves. And I want to say that this bill gives us an opportunity to do that. Integration has to come with maturity. It requires us to confront myths and dismantle our biases, ridding ourselves of colonial ideas that some countries are better, more civilized, more desirable. There are things about all Caribbean countries that we could learn from each other. There are things about each other that would vastly improve our quality of life. My mother could find a bush for everything. I never know somebody that could find a bush like that. So in our neighborhood, people used to come and ask her what kind of bush they could use. But she had a bush for everything. And some things that when I was younger, I would go to school and see and be like, that's lizard food. My mother said it had medicinal properties. And so that kind of knowledge is knowledge that is important in this region. Comparison killed the Federation. We cannot allow it to kill CARICOM. Mr. President, just two more things, if I have the time.
2 things in 2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes, okay. The first is that we have no issue encouraging our young people to seek opportunities in metropoles. We send them so quickly, we're so excited. We all know somebody there. But it seems to baffle us that we could find opportunities within the region, across Africa and in Latin America. In a world that is shrinking, we have to expand our opportunities by exploring untraditional routes. Because if all doors are closing, we have to build new ones. And this bill is not occurring in isolation. It complements other legislative shifts that are occurring in order to align with both our moral values and our regional commitments. Mr. President, I close by saying that this is what a reimagined regionalism requires. In a world where nationalism is on the rise, where countries are turning inward and fortifying themselves, Mr. President, we cannot match the scale of global powers, but together we can match their resolve. This bill is about defining who we are as Caribbean people. This bill is about making sure that we are in alignment with the spirit of CARICOM. It reinforces the principles that our people should be free to work, to move, and to belong among the region. It brings the ideal of the Caribbean community to life in practical human terms. And yes, we would like cheaper flights, but that is a work in progress, like everything else. And it positions Barbados not as a reluctant participant, but as a bold leader in regional progress. Because, Mr. President, if once we heard ever so welcome wait for a call, then today we say with pride and conviction with this bill that this is the call to build, the call to believe, the call to become. And I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Trigg. Senator Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are times that I am pleased that I am not obligated. Mr. President, I rise as a Barbadian, as a Caribbean national, and as a CARICOM national, Mr. President. Mr. President, there is a significant chance that if you gather DNA from everyone in this chamber, and I mean everyone in this chamber, you will probably find that we are all connected. Senator Thompson, my fifth cousin removed. Yeah, you probably are. You look, my females in my family look physically like you. So, but Mr. President, I attended the graduation ceremony at the UWI on the last weekend. There were about 1,000 graduates. And I was thinking at times about this bill, and I asked myself, do these people with these different names look any different from Bajans? And they did not. And what it means is that we are all the same. We came to this place and we're all taken off the same ships and then went on to other places. Mr. President, the University of the West Indies is the melting pot of the Caribbean. Those of us who were fortunate enough to have gone there, and I am not knocking the persons who went overseas, I'm only speaking about those who were fortunate enough to have that Caribbean experience and to be able to meet persons from all the other Caribbean islands. I was lucky, sir, to have had my tertiary education paid for by the government and the people of this country whom I serve. And I had a medical class, sir, that had over 115 people in it. And I do not think you can call an island in the Caribbean or a territory in the Caribbean and it would not have been represented in my class. And what I said, sir, was that if you were fortunate enough to attend the UWI, you got exposed in some way to some of the cultural differences among all of us and the similarities. And one realized how much we were the same. And sir, with your permission, I want to read a short segment, sir, of the address given by the Chancellor, the Most Honorable Doddridge Miller, to the students, to the graduates on Saturday. It says, "Good morning, graduates. Good morning to your families, your lecturers, your mentors, and all who have walked with you on this journey. said, today we gather not merely to mark the end of an academic chapter, but to celebrate the beginning of a new Caribbean story. One that you, the class of 2025, are uniquely positioned to assist in crafting. He must have been thinking about his answer. He must have been. The reality is that the UWI and the people of the Caribbean are together as one, and it's not by accident. I will continue. He said, you arrived through sacrifice, through resilience, through nights of study and days of doubt, through balancing, in some cases, work and school, family and ambition, hardship and hope. You arrived through hurricanes, both literal and metaphorical. You arrived through the pandemic's lingering shadows, through economic uncertainty, and through quiet battles that no one saw, but you endured nonetheless. And I want to read the last paragraph of his address. You are ready to build economies that are inclusive, sustainable, and bold. You are ready to challenge the status quo. You are ready to lead not just with intellect, but with heart. You are ready to show the world what the Caribbean can do. So I urge you, go forward, go proudly, go purposefully. And above all, never forget, you are UWI, you are Caribbean, and you are unstoppable. Mr. President, if I did not support this bill before, I have to support it now. But despite my acceptance that what the changes this bill will bring will more than likely benefit this country, I do have some concerns about what could be the immediate effect if there was a surge. I'm not saying there is going to be a surge if there was a surge. Mr. President, we have a population, and I think our last census was in 2023, I believe. A population of less than 300,000 people. I heard it said today that the population was not growing, and that is not true. The population is growing, but the rate of growth has slowed. It is most definitely an aging and aged population. If you have any doubts, visit the QEH, and you will see, or go into a supermarket, sir, you will see what I mean. The population is definitely an aged population. And sir, anytime you have the possibility of migration, you cannot predict who will come. You can probably exclude some people. You can exclude the criminals and those who might do the country harm, but you cannot exclude those who will come with chronic non-communicable diseases. You cannot exclude the children who need to go into schools. And last but not least, you have to provide all the services, all the social services, and all the normal needs of existence. Mr. President, on Sunday, I think on Sunday's press, there was a big picture of my good friend, now Dr. Burrada, standing for a picture with the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor of UWI. Unfortunately, the caption under it didn't match the picture. And the caption, however, drew our attention to one of the problems of water in this country. And we have stood in this chamber and spoken extensively about water and about energy, and whether having reached 98% capacity for our water supply, what else what else we can do. So I've asked myself whether with all the issues that we've had with water and all the efforts our government is making to improve the water and fix the mains, whether at this time, if there was a significant change in our population, whether we will meet all of our needs. And given the level of construction happening on our south coast and our west coast, what impact this new construction will have on our water and our sewage services. Mr. President, I heard it mentioned this morning that there's been no real progress in housing, and I don't quite believe that. I think there's significant progress in housing, probably in the wrong place. The progress, sir, is not at the bottom end or the middle. The progress, in fact, sir, the construction going on across the water is not meant for people like myself or Senator Thompson. We spoke about this before, because it's unaffordable. Because it's unaffordable for us. But so there is progress in construction. There is housing stock being built. But for those who will normally come as migrants, unless we're targeting specific people, they're not able to afford it. So I have to ask, where will the people who come, if they come in numbers and not just hundreds, what special provisions are we having that will make housing affordable for these persons? Sir, without any doubt, when we had, during COVID, the welcome stamp, there were changes, sir, in the rental prices that probably reflected the ability of those newer people to pay higher rates, or the market shifted to allow them to pay higher rates. But those rates haven't come down. So rents in this country, sir, if you don't own a property, are now higher, significantly higher as a percentage in 2025 than they probably were in 2020. It was mentioned this morning about people sharing accommodation. I personally, sir, I see no problem with persons sharing accommodation, sir. I just returned, sir, from Toronto, and there are flats that people rent all the time and share rooms in flats and houses. That is a norm, because the rent is too high for one person to pay. What we may complain about are the responsibilities of the landlords to provide adequate services and quality housing to the persons who are renting. Now, sir, the truth is that government's attempts at providing housing have not worked out. We've had lots of educational comments in this chamber as to why and where, and we can see for ourselves. What I await to hear, sir, are the solutions. How will we get all of these properties that are started, not finished, and not occupied into a state of occupancy, so that those young people who are dependent on such accommodation can get access, and those who are supposed to come? What about education? Will we have places in schools for young families who may wish to migrate and bring their children? And even for those, sir, who may wish to pay for their children's education, do we have adequate spaces in our private schools for children to go into? Sir, there's a mention of contingent rights to education, healthcare, and social services. I do not wish, sir, in the absence of my colleague, Senator Walker, to speak on education, on healthcare, sir, but there will be adequate time, I believe, to do that. But healthcare has its own issues in terms of capacity and the movement of patients, particularly, and the speed of movement of patients, particularly in the tertiary care system. I do not wish to say I told you so. However, sir, I have to say it. I did say that if you expanded the A&E before focusing on the problems of flow in the hospital, you would only make it worse. And sadly, sir, for the sixth time, it has come to pass. I wish, sir, to dedicate tremendous energy and all of us to try to help to fix it. Now, sir, we spoke, most senators today spoke, with the exception of Senator Trim, as though Barbadians were readily accepting of others who came or will come. But I have a big surprise. I am now old enough to admit that we are terrible at discrimination. I see it in healthcare. The discrimination, sir. I see it in healthcare where persons who are entitled to public care, who speak with a non-Barbadian accent, will be slowed or sometimes denied, not by the healthcare professional, not necessarily by the doctor or the nurse, but by the clerk, who might say, well, you have to pay for that scan. And in fact, you're entitled to have the scan for free, or you're an emergency, and we do provide emergency care. But sir, I'm reminded of, and I'm not bashing, I'm reminded of a memo that came from certain Minister of Health that said that persons who are not Barbadian citizens or permanent residents are advised to seek health care in an institution other than a QEH. I've kept a copy of it. I've kept a copy to remind me of how far up the ladder the discrimination goes. Sir, I would like to appeal to all of us, Barbadians, non-Barbadians, please do not discriminate against our Caribbean brothers. We Barbadians have had the privilege for a long time of traveling within the Caribbean and migrating within the Caribbean. And if you go to Panama and you hear a name like Verde, it is really a Barbadian green that has been changed to Spanish. We have spread our genes all over the Caribbean. And some of the persons that we discriminate against when they come here are our brothers and sisters who have returned. So I wish to close by, and if you remember nothing else that I've said, it's only this. Please, we must not discriminate against our own families. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Miller. Senator King.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to wholeheartedly support this bill. I don't think it is any surprise to anyone that I, like Senator Trim, would be passionate about this. As an artist, I can say here, without any reservations, that the Caribbean has supported my journey and my profession as an artist, from the Bahamas all the way down to Guyana. And it would be remiss of me to even conceive not supporting anything that gives us the opportunity to really realize the potential of the creative industries themselves within this region. Sir, when we look at where we are today, I believe those persons who were members back then dealing with the Federation, wherever they are today, I believe that they'll be counting on us to do the right thing, to finish the job that they envisioned but were unable to complete. I want every single one of us in this room to think seriously about what this means, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. It has been mentioned over and over and over that the world is becoming more and more insular. It means that we ourselves as a region are going to be like, there's a t-shirt that says, Barbados against the world. Literally, you can expand it to be the Caribbean against the world. And it's not that we have anything that we're against people, but because things are becoming more insular in other parts of the world, we get pushed further and further and further away from the big conversations that are going to affect geopolitics. If we do not understand the simple concept which all of us probably learned as children, Prime Minister talks about it a lot and I smile, the idea of many hands make like work. We have to, this is not even a plea for us to even consider. In American parlance, this is a no-brainer. Because at the end of the day, this region individually cannot survive in the global sense. It just can't. We don't have the resources, we don't have people, we don't have the knowledge in terms of technology and all the other things that are happening. But together, I believe we have a lot to offer ourselves to our own survival. I want you to think about this, because these are things that, I guess, with an artistic mind, I think things in a complete different way than most other people. Some years ago, Marvel came up with this wonderful movie that everybody was going berserk over, the Black Panther, and had this idea of Wakanda. This place where technology was, you know, it's a utopia kind of place for persons. And you know, the very first time I looked at it and I watched the movie and I thought to myself, well, why does this have to be fantasy? What stops it from becoming a reality? What stops 166 square miles from thinking that this is possible? What stops us from believing that we have something to offer the rest of the Caribbean and by extension the rest of the world in building out ourselves as that quote-unquote Wakanda? That place where people in the region feel that they can come and excel, from education to business, culture, innovation, whatever. Oftentimes in the manifesto, we talk about Barbados becoming a hub. This gives us the opportunity as a testing piece between these four countries. And I'm sure that the West of the Caribbean is looking on, taking steps gradually, but thinking to themselves, let us see how this works. Because that's how we are in the region. You know, when you think about, and I'm gonna go too quickly because I know the time is getting short, but when you think about what a West Indies cricket team would have accomplished in the 70s and the 80s, you take your mind back to those things, the kind of pride that we had in the region, the kind of togetherness when, you know, cricket was being played. even from a musical standpoint. You know, you got her cricket ground and you hear Gypsy singing, Captain, the ship is sinking. There's a certain amount of pride, a certain amount of unity, a certain amount of identification as being West Indian or Caribbean that none of us in this room could deny. And for anyone to have the notion that because Barbados opens its doors, that all of a sudden, people who live good lives in other parts of the Caribbean are going to suddenly drop everything and descend on Barbados is a total madness, Mr. President. Or old people in particular. Think about it when we get serious about this. What old person who has lived all of their life, 70, 80, 90 years old in Belize, is going to get on a plane to leave to come to Barbados? For what reason? I can give you a story, sir, when they had a freak storm. An older man, I left home in the middle of the night to move him from the house that he was in because I knew that house could not sustain in that environment. As we used to say when we were younger, I had Gurkha to get that man out of the house. But you imagine, luckily, he gave in and moved. After it was over, when he went back, his house was destroyed. No, he would have died in there if he didn't move. But this is how older people are. They're comfortable where they are. They're not going to get on planes to leave to come to Barbados to put strain on our social services. Where do we get these ideas from? But yet we forget that in the 40s and 50s, a lot of our people moved throughout the Caribbean in teaching professions, in nursing professions, all the things. I have relatives as far back as having Panama money and coming back to Barbados and picking up the whole family and going all through the Caribbean, money run out in St. Lucia. Money ran out in St. Lucia. So I got relatives in St. Lucia. I got relatives in Guyana. I got relatives in Trinidad. I got relatives all about to start here in Barbados. So this notion that for somehow that you have a false, almost superiority complex, that people are going to descend and depend on Barbados for a living. Is it parliamentary to say this is a nonsense, sir? I ask.
If you're speaking about something, you can call it that, but you cannot say that anyone is speaking nonsense.
Okay. Well, I will change my language. It does not make sense. It does not make sense. But it is important, though, that we have these conversations because there are legitimate concerns that come out of these types of discussions with people in the general public. And it tells me that we need to do more in terms of our communication with the general public as to how these things, what are the benefits, and to also to listen to the concerns of persons so that we can alleviate some of the fears. Now, one of the things that I myself would always consider when you're moving to a different place, by the time you're small, you always hear, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, I have seen in Barbados that don't actually work. I give you some classic examples. Many years ago, anybody building a house would just put blocks on where it was, and that house would get built. No, boy wouldn't move anything. Lately, you look, you see blocks behind marks. No, think about it. These are very serious. Someone is building, and every block that is on the plot got a mark on it, which means that people are stealing. You had another case where, at one point in time, you're building, and you got copper and all these different things there, and all of a sudden, copper start disappearing. Let me get real. You understand? Different culture, different headset. Which means that when we are doing this, there must be some sort of programs that are put in place for, I guess you were calling it, climatizing people, culturalizing them, whatever terms you want to use, so that you know that if you are coming into Barbados, these are the standards within which we operate. This is the culture. All of these things, you have to take them into consideration as you move forward. But we cannot find ourselves being in any form, shape, or fashion similar to our neighbors in the north. It just does not make good sense. And we can't always use these forums to project fear into the society. I've said it many times in this room. I came through the era in England of Enoch Powell, speaking about the darkies that they want out of England. Meaning, my parents, in some instances, the rest of the people from Jamaica, St. Kitts, wherever, the British had colonies who were in England at that time, after putting in all of their labor to help rebuild it after 2 wars, and this, the Windrush generation, I lived through it. Ain't nothing that the boy tell me other than my parents. And I would not, and I cannot, I can't think in those terms. Because I also know what diversity brings to the table. I'll give you a simple thing that I want you to think about. Most of us grew up in Barbados. A very simple thing that we might take for granted today. But I watch the simple things are the things that impress upon me most. When I was growing up, I knew that there was always a season for watermelons. You know, you get them at a certain time of year, and that's the end of that, till the next time come on again. Today, you could go anywhere in this island at any time, and you'll find watermelons. And science is proving that this watermelon is exceptionally good and nutritious in terms of dealing with cancer and all kinds of other things. But when did this start? With the introduction of when Guyanese came into Barbados in droves and worked in the agriculture sector. You see the difference. And these are things that we cannot deny. So we can't bury our heads in the sand. You look at entrepreneurship, the masses, the different things coming from Trinidad and Tobago. Take a simple walk up to a place like Worthing Square. You can see the difference in Barbados when other persons come in. You know, I was at Worthing Square a couple days ago, and there was a man there doing his trade, and I get him almost like, I guess I was called Arabic food. You know what I'm saying? I can eat a falafel and this, all these kind of things all sorts of stuff. But this is what comes when you have that diversity, as was mentioned by Senator Trim. The whole idea of medicinal plants and all of these other things that we take for granted, you know, you have that transfer of knowledge. But as was mentioned by Senator Malalu, I want us to focus more on what are the opportunities that present themselves for our people in the other territories. And I can see where persons like myself, who are in cultural industries and other things like that, who have had chance to work from hotels to music festivals to whatever else, I can see clearly where there are opportunities for promoters, for sound companies, for actual performers and others to take advantage of this because it gives you an open door where you can go to work. You don't have to reside, but you can go in and work, and you can partner with other people and do business, right? So it might not be a Burger King, which is an American thing, but it could be a Walter's Water. Who knows? But it could be. But the opportunities are there, and it is for us as Barbadians to see how do we take advantage of it rather than looking to see what advantages people are going to take in our land. And it's not difficult for us to do because Barbadians often say you can go anywhere in the world and find a Barbadian. The only reason you can do that is because they left. Think about it. Yes, they left. They left. So just in case people don't realize that, the only way you can say that is because they left. And so if you have that, and these are the people who travel out and go into other people's countries and send back remittances and do all of these things that we talk about, then we must be able to open our doors to our brothers and sisters from across the Caribbean. And sir, with those very few words, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator, the Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for acknowledging me and for affording me this opportunity to speak briefly on this bill. Like the other senators who have spoken before me, I too am supportive of this Caribbean Community Free Movement of Nationals bill. But before I even begin, I wish to apologize to Senator Trim for the way that young girl was made to feel in this country. Though I had nothing to do with it, I am a part of the society that caused that fear. And I pray that others will never have to experience that again, and to remember all those who would have in the past. And part of it comes, sir, because of a particular aspect of this bill that perhaps has not been focused on before. It was Senator Morris who said the problem has never been integration, but freedom of movement. But at a more granular level, it's not even freedom of movement, it's freedom of mass movement. And I wish to couch my words in the words of Walter Rodney, who said in his great work, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, whenever two civilizations meet, both are changed forever. And that in itself, sir, can cause the type of fear and trepidation that some persons may see surrounding this bill. But as I said, the problem has never been movement, it's mass. Because I too, like some of the other senators who have spoken, would call myself a Caribbean person. I was born on the island of St. Martin to an Anguillian father and a Barbadian mother. My paternal grandfather was from Marie-Galante, the small French territory. I have a brother who's Kittitian. I spent 2 years of my life here in Barbados, and then I migrated to St. Kitts for 11 years. And I can always remember in St. Kitts, where I lived in Cayon, I could sit there on the rectory wall and see when the lights are going on in St. Martin on a clear day. And when you drive around the island, you can see St. Eustatius, you can see Saba, and you can see all these islands, so you knew you were not alone. You always felt you were a part of something. If you went down to the Bay Road on a morning, you'll see the Nevisians coming across on the boats, and you look across the water and Nevis is right there. So you always felt like you were surrounded by others, and others were not a danger to you. They were not a threat. You never felt threatened by them. But Senator Trim's experience and mine in coming to Barbados are different. Because as I would have said on several times before, when I came to Barbados, I thought it was paradise. Especially going to school. I mean, the benefits that you had in terms of what was being offered to you in the school system was like nothing I'd seen before. But I came just as a family from somewhere else. Senator Trim came as one who would have added to a group that was here. And whenever you have groups, persons perceive, and it is true, because once there's a group, you tend to hold on to your cultural ideals, rather than if you're an individual, you assimilate more easily. And so persons always feel threatened by groups. I'm not saying that it is the right thing that should have happened, but I believe that is what happened to us. And it goes back to our history, because as Black Stalin would have said, for us of an African descent, we made the same trip on the same ship, but we were just dropped off at different places. But the Caribbean presents a wonderful study of spatial isolation in the human system. Because in biology, there's this area of study in ecology called spatial isolation, where you can have a particular species and it can get separated by an island, a piece of an island breaking off, or some group moving somewhere else, and the conditions are different. And over time, those two populations develop in such a way, because of the different conditions, that if you put them back together, they do not even mate. Well, I don't think that has happened to the Caribbean people, but certainly on a cultural level, a lot happened in those 300 years after we came on the same trip, the same ship, because we did not all experience slavery in the same way, or post-slavery in the slavery. Because the thing about Barbados, Barbados is the most anglicized country in the Caribbean. We never had the mass group of East Indians or Chinese coming in as happened in Jamaica and Trinidad. And so, for example, in Jamaica, we saw changes in how, when the two groups met, they influenced each other, to the point that in 1913, Jamaica had to introduce a law that banned a substance called Indian hemp, what we now call marijuana. And why did they have to do that? Because the East Indians brought it with them. It was a special plant for them. And they were also allowed to bring their spiritual people. And one group of Indian spiritual people is a group that are called the sadhus. And the sadhus are guys who wear locks and walk around all day smoking marijuana. But they pray for people, and people feed them. When the Africans in Jamaica encountered them, they were moved by them. And they started doing the same thing too, but they forgot they had to go and work. So productivity fell. And therefore, the law was introduced to ban this thing because it affected productivity. So that is one way in which, when two cultures meet, you can have a negative impact in some way. But we've seen the positive side of it. For example, if you speak to an Afro person from Trinidad, I mean, their experience is different because they have commingled with the Indian community in a way that has changed their outlook on life. And so you would get people like Brother Marvin singing Bahaji Bai, the Brotherhood of the Boat, that these two groups came together and forged something new. Or David Rudder, the Ganges and the Nile, when these two rivers met, these two groups met, it changed and created something that was totally different. So there are positive aspects and there are negative aspects to when two cultures collide. As I said, what has happened to us is that over the 300 years of slavery, there wasn't any travel really in between, and certainly not mass migration. this particular bill is introducing something new, which is the possibility of mass movement, even though, as many persons have said, we do not expect it to happen. But the question is, what happens if it happens? What happens if it happens? And it's really a question about what kind of Barbados are we bringing people to? What kind of Barbados are we inviting people to? I believe that Senator Malalou made a very good point when he spoke to the citizen by investment issue. Because one of the things that we have to be wary of, as he outlined with the position of St. Kitts, where you have more persons who are citizens by investment than persons who actually live in the country. If a large group of those people move back, you may have what can be termed migratory gentrification, where people, a mass of people are moving in with larger sums of money, who are more affluent, and can therefore affect the way of life of people in the country. And I think that's an area that we can pay some attention to. Not that I know what we can do with it, but just to point out that it's there. And as Senator Maynard pointed out, you know, the possibility is always there that there can be a burden on our social services, because we do not know. So we have to prepare for whatever the outcome can be. We just have to prepare ourselves. We do not know. But certainly, some of the positives of this movement can be, as Senator King said, the commingling of cultures to create something even greater than we have right now. The cross-fertilization of ideas and other things, which is what the University of the West Indies would have done in its early days. You know, we have developed, but I believe the University of the West Indies, in its initial idea, was one to produce cross-fertilization throughout the region where people intermingled with each other. But then suddenly you started having every campus having the same thing. And therefore that restricted the desire to move. Not that I don't know that we can change that now, but I'm just saying that it helped. And so you got Mac Fingal with his Calypso, no Bajan, because when the boys went down to, when the gentlemen went down to Jamaica and mingled, the cultures mingled, they came back with Jamaican wives and so on. So all these things were there. So as I said, there has been movement, but what we're talking about now is mass. And with mass movement comes the collision of cultures. And then we have to look at what the negative impact can be and what the positive impact. In terms of Barbados, as Senator Drakes would have pointed out, while we support this, there are some things we need to fix, and fix like yesterday. Really fix urgently. Our Minister of Home Affairs said just a few days ago that many of the people who are going to Dodds are now teenagers. Mm-hmm. Teenagers in Barbados. It means that something is wrong with the social fabric of this country. Something is wrong with our culture. That's not what our culture used to be. And I dare say that an integral part of Barbadian culture that people do not like to talk about was church. Your faith. That is what helped to shape the society. And when I say faith, I do not mean any particular denomination or anything. Some church. You go and get some church when Sunday comes. So you will hear most Barbadians of a particular vintage say, I used to go to church in the morning and then Sunday school at a different place in the afternoon and all that, to get some church. And that was a part of our culture. When you went to school, you got more church. You were shaped And the question is, how can we expect our young people to be like us when we are not treating them how we were treated? When we're not giving them the things that shaped us? Maybe we have progressed so much, and we believe that if you educate a man in mind and not in morals, he'll be all right. See? And so, what kind of Barbados are we bringing people to? Senator Malibu spoke about the enforcement of laws, simple things like the seat belt and not sitting in the carriage of an SUV or whatever. But sir, I will go back to my pet area. We have a serious problem with smoking in this country. Everywhere you go, you're smelling herb about Barbados. You can't breathe properly. And the reality is that, you know, I could remember Dr. Glenn Gale talking about tobacco way back in the 80s and warning people, and we made changes. But somehow everybody feels that this thing that we said was so dangerous. I can see Cassius Clay now with the girl with the skeleton suit, come back home and come off the drugs, and you're begging people. And all of a sudden now, everybody walking about puffing something in your face. You talk to people in construction, you go on a construction site, you go out with a mask. You can't breathe. And not for dust. Something is wrong with our culture. And I'm appealing to the government again, pull back some of these things. At least restrict where you can smoke. Like in people's backyard, or you're going, where you got them now, the little, what they call them? You got shops. You got vape shops or what? Go in the vape shop and do what you got to do. Knock yourself out in there. But not in people's public spaces. And you talk about entrepreneurship. Every little boy feels now that he must be walking about with a sweetie tot under his arm. He hustling. He hustling. Well, I saw some the other day, they're not walking with sweetie tots anymore. No man, they went and buy a whole basket thing, you know, the plastic container, so they expand the business. And that has to be illegal. It has to be illegal. But right there in the open. So something is wrong with our culture. And so when we bring people to this country, when you bring the impressionable little young girl like Miss Trim to this country, what kind of Barbados is she coming to? When her parents decide to migrate because the father got a job or something, or just want to seek something better, and she comes and has to go into a school, what is she going to see? And so this bill is a little larger than what is on the paper here. And I want to implore us, I support it fully because I am one who has benefited tremendously from migration. And as I've said before in my first speech in this chamber, sir, I said I'm probably the most unlikely person to be here. It's not where I expected to be in my life because of where I came from. But I have always been and always made the determination that Barbados educated me, and whatever I have, I will use for the development of this country. And I know that there are others who will come and will endeavor to do the same thing. But when they come, let us create the type of environment where their children can thrive. Where some of these things, these nefarious things that are destroying our own young people, will be expunged from our society. And so I wish to commend the government for bringing this bill and being front runners in the region on it. And to just encourage all persons out there who are listening that there's nothing to fear in our Caribbean neighbors. There's nothing to fear in the others who are out there. They are our brothers and sisters. We may have experienced 300 years differently. There may be some nuances and some wonderful things, new exciting things that we can learn that can help us to develop. Let us embrace each other. And as has been said, conscious of the geopolitical situation in our region now more than ever, we must integrate as a people. Because as we've seen, as I said years ago, when a group of our leaders abandoned our people and went to sit in a mud room in a mansion in Florida, they betrayed the people. Because from then, the person they went to meet had already shown how he feels about us. And no matter what people offer, if we have to suck salt, we'll suck it together in this region. But we will work together as a people. We will work together as a people, and we will forge our own destiny. And we will not be bullied. We will not be bribed. We are a people. It was C.L.R. James in his work, Gramsci's Conversation on Hegemony, who said, nobody has ever asked what the West Indian man is capable of. Nobody knows what the West Indian man is capable of, because nobody has ever asked. This situation and the current crisis is asking us, and we must answer boldly that we are a proud people, and we are one people who have come from different places, even now. But together, we will build a strong region that will be a force to be reckoned with in our world. I wish to thank you for this.
Thank you, Senator Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to my fellow senators. It is good to come in the afternoon when it is peaceful and quiet. I'm coming after independent senator assist in the mood. But Mr. President, I just have a few questions and concerns that I'm going to zero in on in my discussion here, because it was widely accepted that there are real concerns that Barbadians have when it comes to the free movement of people. There is general acceptance from both sides, based on what I've heard, that question about housing is legitimate. Healthcare system and the state of our healthcare system is legitimate. Transportation, as well as education.